The customer is very specific about the problem. There's an occasional roughness in the engine when it's hot. But you've taken the vehicle out for a test drive, and all you've heard is this. Your diagnosis seems to rule out everything except a malfunctioning injector. But your resistance check of the injector coils and your injector balance test show nothing abnormal. At this point, many technicians decide to replace all the injectors. It's an effective fix, but an expensive way to get there. Hi, I'm Jim Scopolitas, here to show you the new fuel injector tester that's changing all that, J-39021. This new tool replaces the two previous testers, J34733 and 34733A. It should be at your dealership by now. And coming soon are a new storage case for holding the tester and your other fuel system test equipment, and a revised instruction booklet. The new tester must be used for injector diagnosis on all port fuel injection systems and may be used on throttle body systems and CPI too. It provides an injector balance test that has two important improvements. It allows you to select the appropriate current for the injectors you're testing, as shown on an application chart that's provided. And its test cycling actually pulses an injector 100 times in each test. These two features give the injectors a workout that really approximates on-the-road conditions. Even more important, the tester offers a new diagnostic check, a voltage drop test of the injector's coils. Here again, the tester provides appropriate current settings and a test sequence that applies that current steadily for 5 seconds. That really tests the injector's coil under load. Now, someone may ask, how come we need all that fancy stuff? Our old injector balance tester worked okay, and we can always test an injector coil by using an ohm meter to measure the resistance. So why do we need this new tool? There are two answers. The higher current requirements of some of our newer fuel injection systems and recent changes in fuel, specifically alcohol in fuel. Let's begin with that one. In last year's program called Today's Fuel, we reviewed how octane can be increased and some harmful emissions reduced by adding oxygen to the basic hydrocarbons in gasoline. One way of adding oxygen is by adding alcohol, either ethanol, which is grain alcohol, or methanol, wood alcohol. But too much alcohol is bad for fuel systems. That's why all GM service manuals and owner's manuals specify strict limitations on how much alcohol may be present in fuel. Ethanol may be used if it constitutes no more than 10% of the fuel. If methanol is used, it must constitute no more than 5% of the fuel and be accompanied by special additives that reduce its capacity to damage fuel system components. The trouble is, some gas stations pump fuel containing more alcohol than these percentages. So we're seeing more and more injectors with internal damage. Damage that's bad enough to cause an engine miss, but that can't be pinpointed without using this tester. Here's what alcohol can do. Because it degrades rubber, it can damage the diaphragm inside the fuel pressure regulator and the injector O-rings. Inside the injector, alcohol can penetrate the nylon bobbin around which the solenoid coil wire is wound and reach the coil wire itself. If there are any tiny nicks or abrasions in the wire's transparent insulation, the alcohol will further degrade the insulation. That can lead to a short across two or more adjacent windings. Of course, that kind of short will weaken the magnetic field created by the coil when it's energized. As a result, the coil won't properly raise the valve to deliver fuel. If a short in a coil is constant, you can usually discover the lowering of resistance by using an ohm meter. But typically, the short is intermittent, occurring only when the coil is hot and loaded by a current high enough to jump the air gap between bare windings or to break down any oxides that may have formed between them. Of course, when you measure resistance with an ohm meter, you are applying a small amount of current, but only a few milliamps, nowhere near enough to really load the coil. However, when you use the new tester to measure voltage drop across the coil, you can apply the appropriate current, up to 4 amps, for a long 5-second test. You can pretty much count on that to turn up any intermittent short in the coil windings. Those 3 current settings represent the second reason we need the revised tester, to operate our newer types of injectors. A few years ago, half an amp was all the current we needed. Today, half an amp is still right for driving the higher resistance injectors, which are most of our PFI or multi-port injectors. But the injectors used in the Achievas 2.3 liter should be tested with 2.5 amps, and the 2 throttle body injectors in the Silhouette's 3.1 liter VIN-D engine require 4 amps. So does the single CPI or central multi-port injector solenoid used in the Bravada's 4.3 liter VIN-W. These higher current, low resistance injectors are peak and hold injectors. The 2.3 liter Multec injector may look like this Multec for the 3300 engine, but the 3300 version is designed to be driven by a single half-amp on-off pulse, while the 2.3 liter injector is driven by an initial peak of 2 amps, which drops off to a hold level of half an amp. This pattern produces quicker opening and quicker closing, so that the injector delivers a more precise quantity of fuel. And, as we've said, for the Bravada's 4.3 liter engine, the initial peak for the central multi-port injector solenoid is 4 amps. Its hold level is 1 amp. So, for testing them, we need these higher current options. Now back to injector problems. The coil test checks for an electrical malfunction, a shorted or even an open coil. To check for a strictly mechanical problem in the fuel metering part of the injector, we still use the injector balance test, which checks the volume of fuel each injector releases compared to all the others. That's the balance part. If one injector releases considerably more or less fuel than the others, and its coil is functioning all right, you know there's a mechanical problem, binding or wear or corrosion. Can alcohol cause these kinds of problems? Unfortunately, yes. Most of these parts are metal. Alcohol and the impurities that often come with it can damage some metals directly. In addition, because alcohol mixes easily with water, it transports water easily and therefore subjects these parts to corrosion. Corrosion can change the amount of fuel released and even cause a stuck open or stuck closed condition. To catch the whole range of problems with the balance test, we need the new tester. Here's why. The original tester pulsed the injector once, holding it open for half a second. That told you whether or not the orifice was plugged, but not much more. The second generation tester offered options. You could pulse the injector at various rates. However, the tester didn't come with guidelines for selecting a rate. And like the first tester, it didn't supply enough current to operate all of our newer injectors. Those are 2 more reasons why the new tester must now be used for injector testing on all port fuel injection Oldsmobile engines. When 1994 manuals come out, you'll find it featured in the injector balance test in Chart C2A in Section 6E. And this will be the second test in Chart C2A, following 2 versions of the new injector coil test, which should be performed first. Which version of the coil test you follow depends on the temperature of the engine when you run the test. Now for the actual procedures. Since the coil test is new, we'll focus on that. Here's what you'll need. The tester, a Fluke 87 multimeter, the J-39021, a scan tool, and the instruction booklet. You'll need this booklet for instructions about the procedure and to refer to an application chart, which tells you, according to the vehicle's model year and engine, which current setting you should use and how much voltage you should read across each coil when it's energized. You'll also need a way to record readings. Oh, one more thing. If you're testing the Bravada's central multiport solenoid or throttle body injectors like those for the 3.1 liter in the Silhouette, you'll need a special terminal adapter for the tester identified in the instruction booklet. Or you could make adapters for any injectors using this connector test lead kit. Okay, let's say you suspect an intermittent injector malfunction in a 1993 Achieva. To know which version of the coil test to follow, use the scan tool to determine engine coolant temperature. If it's between 50 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit, you'll use the first diagnostic chart. If it's not, you'll be sent on to the second version of the coil test on page 2. Here's why. If the temperature of the injector is between 50 and 95 degrees, the resistance of its coil should be close to normal. That would produce a normal voltage reading. But if the temperature of the coil were high, its resistance would be abnormally high, making the voltage reading abnormally high too. An injector that's neither hot nor too cold and that's designed for our particular model of the 2.3 liter should show a voltage drop that's between the minimum and maximum shown here. Let's face it though, if you're working with an engine that's hot, you don't want to wait for it to cool down. So for temperatures outside the normal range, the tester allows you to check the coils by comparing their voltage drops, not with a range of normal values, but with each other. For our 2.3 liter engine, all coils that test within 0.7 volts of each other would pass the coil test. In this case, coolant temperature is outside the 50 to 95 degree range. So you'll use page 2 of the coil test, and the coil's voltage readings will be compared with each other's. To avoid releasing too much fuel into the cylinders during the 5-second tests, be sure to relieve fuel pressure in the system. And to avoid an accidental repressurizing of the system if the ignition is turned on, don't disconnect the battery, but do remove the ignition key. Connect the tester to the vehicle's battery and to a good ground. Next, set the current selector switch. To do that, you refer to the application chart in the instruction booklet. In a 1993 Achieva with a quad overhead cam L40 VIN3 engine, the correct current is 2.5 amps. Next, set the Fluke 87 to measure voltage and set the range to the 10th scale. Connect the meter to the tester. Here's why it's important to use this kind of meter set to read tenths. The voltage you'll be looking at should increase during the 5 seconds of the test. That's especially true with peak and hold injectors, which draw a lot of current. If you use an auto-ranging feature, the reading may shift ranges so rapidly that you'll have trouble interpreting what you're seeing. Next, connect the tester to an injector. Now you're ready to energize it. During the 5-second test, expect the voltage to rise. Ignore all readings during the first second. After that, look for two things: the lowest voltage displayed, which you'll record, and any sign of erratic voltage, which makes big jumps up and down. Here you go. After the first second, the lowest voltage displayed was 5.3. Make a note of it. Then repeat the test at each injector, recording the lowest voltage you see and watching for erratic performance. When you find a coil with an intermittent short, it'll probably look more like this. That's a significant difference. The instructions tell you how to interpret your results. Any injector producing an erratic reading or a reading of more than 9.5 volts must be replaced. Of the remaining lowest voltage readings, select the highest one as your standard. Now find that subtracted value column in the application chart, and note that for our quad 4, all injectors should be within 7/10 of that standard one. Now you do some subtraction. And find that all the injectors, except one, are within 7/10 of the standard. And there's your culprit. So, loading the injector coils with the tester has diagnosed your intermittent miss. You replace the bad injector. And then, if it's a multiple injector engine, proceed to test the strictly mechanical parts of the injectors with the balance test using a fuel pressure gauge in the tester. This test procedure is much the same as before, and the booklet reminds you how to select the appropriate current setting. Let's sum this up. Drivers need to be warned about excessive alcohol in fuel. But when injector damage happens, this tester can help you find and fix it. See you next time.